Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Laura Aural, a psychic medium and a medical intuitive, and I'm actually here on a Monday night. It's about 11 o'clock. I'm finding that I'm actually able to, I'm running out of a bit of time through the week, so I'm wanting to get on here and do the Q&As that I've been promising to do. I'll be doing Australia today. And I'm going to see what actually comes through for me, but I've also written some notes and some of the information that, not that I've been tuning into, just what I've actually heard and read about some of the things that are happening. So I thought I might start with a bit of a summary. I wanted to really try to make this one brief, so I want to be able to stay focused on moving it through. So I might just read some of the things that are kind of, I'm feeling like may be important for me to actually tune into some of these topics. And as we all know that Australia is having a fuel crisis, or globally, you know, the countries are having a fuel crisis. And so I just looked up that that there's 38 days remaining of petrol. Diesel has 30 to 34 days, and jet fuel has about 30 days. There's a fuel excise that they're going to be reducing by 50%, so it comes down about 26.5 cents a litre or something. And they're going to be foregoing the GST in New South Wales and some others, so we won't be charged the GST. Couple of other things that are kind of been highlighted to me that I've sort of stumbled across. Now, Labor's trying to push through 12,500 citizenships, mostly predominantly in the western suburbs of Sydney, and it's predominantly the Labor Green voting bloc out there. So that's going to be interesting. Pauline Hanson reported that, and she actually feels it's in relation to try to buy up votes, push them through where they can just permanently vote Labor, get them on some kind of welfare program and vote Labor. And also too, so regarding digital ID, they actually were able to push through in November 2024, they were able to push through some core legislation regarding digital ID, but they seem to be doing a recent push for something. And I feel it's in relation to, or I read, not feel, but I read it's in relation to, oh, here, I've actually got it. Let me just go through my notes here. Might be easier rather than looking down. So in December 2024, Labor government successfully pushed through core legislation for digital ID. So they want to, it's expanding to the private sector. They're calling it the Phase 4 push. And the goal basically will allow you to use your government verified ID to open up bank accounts, sign mobile phone contracts, or apply for rental properties without handing over physical documents. But also too, it's linked to the social media ban with age verification. So in order to actually comply with age verification, it may actually start to enforce all users who are logging into the system or opening up accounts to basically verify their ID in some form. And so a bit of data harvesting happening there, I feel. Anyway, I just kind of wanted to give that update. I'm sure that you're all kind of in tune with what's happening as well and listening to everything, but sometimes mainstream media isn't always as forthcoming with the true situation. I might actually go straight into the questions and see how it opens up for me. And I'll just go through them one by one. Okay. Starting with the first question. The financial situation in the country, will it deteriorate and how much? And this is from healing moon. The financial situation in Australia. I'm just getting that there's going to be some kind of crash. I don't know what that means, lock, stock, and barrel. So there seems to be a bit of a push with properties at the moment. Where there are issues, there's always opportunity. So I feel what's happening is there's a real push for property at the moment. And I don't know if there's new legislation coming in regarding that, but there seems to be a lot of different companies and organisations that are pushing, saying new legislation is going to be changing. So to sort of be on top of that. And I think one of those is in relation to capital gains tax, where they, rather than be charged half of the capital gains, I think they're wanting to remove that completely. So I think some of these companies are coming in to probably try to encourage people buying into the property before the legislation takes place. So I feel like there's going to be some kind of boom with property sales happening. But also I feel like there's going to be some kind of fall as well, to be honest. I feel like people may be overstretching. Yeah, stretching past their limits. So in terms of the financial situation, in terms of housing, I'm getting that Australia will go into a recession, and I feel that we kind of fluctuate. I just feel that the government's not managing things effectively. They're probably trying to make money. That's why they're probably introducing this capital gains, where they're trying to remove it from being charged capital gains on half of the gain, capital gain from selling a property, to removing that completely. And so you're basically paying capital gains tax on the whole gain of that sale. So I feel like they're going to come across and try to appear that they're doing good, but they're actually doing more damage. And I don't feel like they're managing things very well. And they're making a lot of promises they won't be able to keep. So I kind of feel that Australia is heading into a recession, if we're not already there, or dipping into, I don't believe that we'll reach a depression, but I feel certain aspects. But where there's going to be an issue, there's always going to be, so there's going to be something booming, and I feel this might bring an influx of people moving into the investment market for property. But also where there's a boom, there'll be a crash. And when there's a crash, properties will be sold for cheap. And that's where people can start making money. So there's always opportunity that comes up with that. But there's going to be a lot of people who may perhaps suffer or not be able to afford what they're getting themselves into, because I feel like that's really being pushed at the moment. And I'm seeing ads for these different organisations holding webinars and stuff like that, trying to push this new policy that's going to be introduced, or already been introduced, or it will after a certain point. So if you can actually buy before this policy comes through, you'll be exempt. And I think that's where they're going to be trying to push to expand something, so to try to move some money through. But I feel it's going to sort of not, some people are not going to come out well from it, is my feeling. So I don't necessarily see the economy crashing yet. At the moment, I'll just see how I progress with the reading. Okay, next question from Jean. Jeannie, what types of moves will Australians do to support each other and come up with new ideas to move the country forward, instead of giving in to more restrictions and obstacles? It's an interesting question because there are more restrictions and obstacles that are actually they're trying to push. They're trying to sort of Albanese is trying to maximise the opportunity to actually push the Green New Deal. Oh, sorry, the Paris Accord and the EVs and so forth. That's starting to backfire. A lot of things are backfiring, and the backfiring is coming from people who are aware, from One Nation and all the people that are who's signing up for One Nation, who are becoming aware. They seem to be the only trustworthy party at the moment that people are actually putting faith in. They seem to be more patriotic and wanting to protect and defend our sovereignty. And so I feel because of that, that's where the momentum's coming from. The people are not wanting all of these restrictions that are going to happen or attempt to happen to us. So the more backlash that the government gets in terms of feedback and unhappiness of some of these changes, the one thing the government needs is popularity. And so if they can bring in more people to actually garner votes, free votes, basically paying for votes, bringing them in, giving them citizenship and guaranteeing. And so these marginal seats probably could make a difference. So I did predict that even though the One Nation Party and Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party is really building momentum, and they will pick up more Senate seats around the country, and they will pick up even some seats in the lower house. And I feel in some areas they will actually dominate. I don't feel One Nation will win. I feel, unfortunately, the Albanese government may just sneak their nose in at the next 2028 election. And I feel one of the main reasons why that's going to happen is because Labor, One Nation's overtaking Liberal. In some polls, One Nation's overtaking Labor, and Liberal doesn't have enough insight and is in self-preservation mode, that is actually wanting to perhaps be against One Nation, and perhaps may team up with some of the Labor policies, garnering favour from Labor, thinking that that's going to actually advantage them, but it's actually going to disadvantage us and the people who had faith in Liberals. And so, and also Liberal really has mismanaged this country as well, because the Scott Morrison government was in power for a good 2 cycles, and that was during COVID. So with a lot of the push for the vaccine and the lockdowns and so forth. So I feel both parties have really let us down, and One Nation's really highlighting that. But unfortunately, I don't feel that they're going to have enough steam or enough, that they may have clout, but they just won't have enough to get them over the line for 2028. Because I feel the Albanese government's going to be quite innovative in how they actually get themselves over the line. And I've said it about Canada, where they've got people in government that are basically the Canadian equivalent to the rhinos being Republicans in name only. Australia has that as well. They have Australian form of rhinos here in the government as well. I look over to my left when I'm actually just getting the information through. So I hope that that's actually answered the question. So the restrictions and the obstacles, the way that people are going to come forward and support each other, is basically collectively come forward and support what they support each other in some of these, protesting about these policies, standing up against these policies, speaking up against these policies that they don't agree with, digital ID and so forth. And I feel, even though the Albanese government's basically saying that it's mandatory for businesses to actually accept cash, they're going to try to start phasing out cash. So if you can see really what's happening is, and I'm seeing what's really happening is happening a lot in the specific Western countries that are under the Commonwealth banner, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, which are really influential countries with a very strong economy, well, once was, and was part of an alliance, is now being fractured. And I feel like the Commonwealth is really not, the British Commonwealth is really not what it was before. And I do feel that it's being captured, and I do feel that government officials in mainly those three countries, UK, or four countries, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, seem to be really in cahoots in pushing a socialist agenda, a communist agenda, basically. And they're repeating some of the things. If you recognize what's been happening in the US, they're repeating those things here now. They're basically mimicking those things, which shows that there's an overall structure of where it's coming down from. And I really do believe that it's actually coming down from, I feel China is captured. We are becoming vassal states to China, as are New Zealand, I feel, is already there. Canada is pretty much there. And I think Great Britain is basically no longer great. No longer great. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Hi, Laura. Apologies, I have 3 questions. Okay, let's see what you have. And this is from Waratah Healing. Nice name. Will there be fresh food shortages with diesel and fertiliser disruptions continuing? How will Australian food producers, Australian farmers be able to plant and harvest this year? If this is likely, what will the government do to lessen the impact? What can we, the general public, do realistically that doesn't put a strain on fragile system, thinking of families with small children? Will countries, individuals or corporations be held responsible for current food shortages, Australia, worldwide? The government continues to censor. What can the general public do to effect meaningful change, with the system appears to have a different agenda than the public? You're spot on with everything. And it has been a long Friday. 4th question. Above all, at your discretion, naturally, will Australia withdraw from the WHO, World Health Organization, and if so, do I have a time frame? Let's work in reverse. Australia will absolutely not withdraw from the WHO. In fact, Australia is going to allow themselves to come under what they're wanting to push, in terms of them being the governing bodies when it comes to any pandemics or global health issues, that they feel that it would be at their discretion on what countries would have to shut down and actually perform a particular way. So I feel under the current administration, you can expect to see more involvement with the World Health Organization and under some of these governing bodies. Australia is very compliant. And basically who runs the World Health Organization is pretty much, even though it is run by many governing bodies, I feel it's very influenced by China's objectives. And the next question, the government continues to censor. What can the general public do to effect meaningful change when the system appears to have a different agenda than that in the public? That's true. What's going to change is the more people that actually become aware of the change and the more people who actually speak up. The worst thing we can do right now, and it's actually difficult sometimes to come forward and actually to speak what you feel may be happening, because potentially I can be censored or, anything could happen. But we'll see. I might cut that out. But I feel honestly the worst thing what we can do is, collectively we are very powerful, and we've got to have faith in the momentum of what's building now. Just timing wise, it's not the right time. That's what I'm feeling. I'm feeling the timing is not the right time. I feel Australia hasn't reached its worst point yet, unfortunately. That's what I feel. I feel Canada has, but I feel Australia hasn't. I feel UK has. I feel with New Zealand is probably coming out of a cycle. I feel New Zealand's going to start to shift. I feel like there's going to be opposing influence from the left leaning. And I feel New Zealand's going to start shifting, but they still are quite influenced. But I feel like they're going to start to make a stand. But I feel Australia quite hasn't reached its peak in self-destruction, pretty much. You know, the reduction of our sovereignty and we're a rich country in many ways with many resources, and I feel like we are basically beholden to other dominant nations now. And we are a very vast, geographically, a very vast nation, but in terms of demographically, we don't have a big population here to be able to withstand something like that, particularly if they're importing people that may have opposing views or not necessarily respect our way of life. But we'll see. Okay. And let's move on to the next one. Will countries, individuals, or corporations be held responsible for the current shortages in Australia and worldwide? No, not really, because okay, I feel two things are kind of happening at the same time. What's happening with the US and Iran, and what they're doing with Iran is they're trying to stop a regime from being destructive and disruptive, not just to the Middle East, but globally. They may be able to physically make a shift by taking away their methods of producing nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles that are targeting allied nations and so forth. But what they're not, there's a spiritual war that's going to be coming out of this. And that spiritual war is just something that's going to be very hard to manage. And I feel what's going to happen is it's almost like those, I think it's called guacamole, where you see them at Luna Park or something, where the heads pop up and you've got to try to whack them. Whack-a-mole, whatever they're called. Guacamole, I think, is a food. And every time they pop up, you try to hit them and they get faster and faster. It's going to be a little bit uncontrollable. And it's going to be, the objective would be to target nations like Australia, Canada, USA, UK, those nations that are powerful Western democratic nations that are had very capitalist ideas, very Christian nations. They're going to be, it's already infiltrated, it's already brewing, and there's going to be disruptions on many levels. And so trying to stop and shift the power in Iran may change things politically in that in the Middle East, and the way the Middle East kind of works in conjunction with Iran, and but it's what they've already created. What these sleeper cells, these terrorists, these lone wolves. That's what I feel has yet to come. And I'm looking at things perhaps sabotaging infrastructure, either cyber attacks, sabotaging sabotage, water supply, perhaps. I'm seeing a few things. Whether it's specifically to Australia or whether it's going to happen in different countries. I'm seeing disruptions in Australia. I'm seeing a rising movement in Australia And I'm seeing two movements. I'm seeing the movement of momentum building of people who are very patriotic, and they're being drawn to One Nation, and One Nation's leading the way. But I'm also seeing that there's an undercurrent that's happening, and it's that undercurrent that's going to be very hard to manage, and a very weak government whose actually sole objective is not for the people. What I believe now is really the objective is to stay in power. So whatever they're wanting to implement, basically they go ahead with the agenda. And the agenda that I've talked about in other videos, the 2030 agenda, the 2040 agenda, the 2060 agenda, where eventually you're going to have, if it continues on this path, you're going to have China as being the world dominating leader in many aspects, with the world's largest military, with the world's largest economy. That's the objective. But that's not going to eventuate. In parts of the region, they will be successful. In parts of the global regions, they will be successful, but not globally. And what's happening with the Trump administration at the moment is they're actually garnering a lot of support from the Middle East. They're garnering a lot of support from Latin America, from the Latin American countries. And now there's a movement happening in some countries in the European Union that are actually voting against their policies. So the European Union basically had voted against Belgium. Belgium, who with Ursula, who's the lady who's the current EU president, and the people who support or who's pushing those global policies, basically they've voted against, by surprise, the EU Assembly voted against. So what they voted for was to actually start to do deportations. And they voted against some other policies that they're trying to push through. Germany, I think, local mayors and that are more conservative are actually starting to win. People are starting to rise. People are now. So this is I feel it's a very precarious period for many of us, not just in Australia, but around the world. And what happens globally, will affect us here. And we can't think that because we're isolated that we won't be affected. We'll be affected in more ways. And I feel Albanese is trying to form some kind of alliance. Can't quite see who he's trying to form an alliance with. The Albanese government. Some kind of Asian nations. This is where I used this quote before. Runs with the foxes and chases with the hounds. The Albanese government's doing the same. They're playing both sides of the fence. So they're forming alliances, but they're also kind of undermining the sovereignty of Australia. And they have another agenda. So the alliances that they're forming is really to push the agenda ultimately, but not for the people of Australia, not for the benefit of Australia. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of people and corporations being held responsible, people are going to start to be held responsible in many areas. There's going to be prosecutions happening in that, but in relation to corporations and individuals being held responsible here in Australia, I'm just getting no, or not immediately. If it would be much further down the track, not immediately. It would have to be a different government. I see a different government coming in, but unfortunately for us, I actually see that we're going to have a little bit more of this. which can be quite damaging. So I feel we need to start to brace ourselves a little bit without causing too much fear or panic. But yeah. And remember, these are just my feelings, my impressions, my intuition, but um, I really believe our intuition's never wrong. It's our interpretation of what we're receiving. And sometimes our biases, our fears, our inhibitions, our whatever can kind of taint the way we're receiving information or translating the information. And also to speaking your truth publicly, and putting weight behind it sometimes, can be a little challenging as well, because I understand that people do watch these videos. But in saying that, I know that I've accurately predicted a lot of things that are happening, but I can be inaccurate as well. So these are just my feelings, and I'd like to reiterate that. These are my feelings, my visions only. What was the other question? Okay, will there be fresh food shortages? I got yes. With diesel and fertilizer disruption, I've already spoken to our local nursery, and they're basically saying they're finding it hard to get fertilizer in because of what's happening with Iran and the oil and so forth. They're finding it hard to get fertilizer in. And so I feel the people who will be suffering is our farmers. And I heard that they're not going to, because of the fertilizer and that, they're going to actually not harvest as much. And so when they basically start to grow more crop, they're going to look at growing less crop so they can kind of be able to manage the crops that they have. So I feel it's a really important period for us as, citizens of this country, really just be mindful of that and prepare ourselves. And I feel there may be potential for some panic, and so you want to kind of be ahead of the curve a little bit and start to prepare yourself where you've kind of got things enough to sort of, where there's intermittent disruptions. If the Albanese government, the Labor government, gets its way in capitalizing on what's happening globally with the oil crisis, and worsening it by trying to capitalize on pushing their green agenda, and to be remembered as the person who actually implemented the Green New Deal here in the Paris Accord to its fullest capacity here in Australia. I feel those people should be held to account, because there will be a lot of damage done to the country in more ways than people actually are considering. And I think people really underestimate the amount of energy and power that it's going to take to actually have to run the electrical grid that will support clean energy. Electricity is not clean. Electricity can be very dirty. And yeah, batteries and all of that can be very dirty. And the things that radiate from that aren't really healthy for our biology. So yeah, and they have a life cycle, and we're going to be having a graveyard of a lot of mechanical equipment. But if they continue, if they continue down that path, which I suspect they're going to try to they're going to try to capitalize in unfortunate situations to push things through. And the only time they're going to pull the brakes is when there's backlash. And when there's backlash, they pull back. So that's why they announce everything's okay. You don't need to be concerned, don't panic, and then they start to change their tune, and people, they're getting backlash. And what they're also doing is now they were accusing One Nation of not having any policies, but they're actually starting to tout some of One Nation policies almost as a cover-up to cover themselves for the mishaps that they've been making in what they've been saying publicly. So I feel there will be shortages. I feel there will be intermittent disruptions. I feel there will potentially be sabotage. And it will cause disruption in some places more than others. So I feel it's it's your duty to basically ensure that you've got jerry cans at home that actually have water enough to sort of support your family. And you've got, a few weeks supply of food at a time ahead of the curb, and things that are, things that are important to sort of protect your family. Yeah, and I hope that everything that I'm feeling is wrong, because then that way those things won't happen. But I'm getting a caution, and I've been getting a caution. I've been getting a sense of urgency that I mentioned as well in the last couple of videos. And I feel it's important that we sort of start to protect ourselves, but collectively come together. We can't give up faith in who we are as a nation. We're all Australian, and I'm proud to be Australian, and we need to sort of have faith in that, because we are a good nation, and we've got to bring back that patriotism in what we all have in this country, and had for many years. And I also feel it's going to be surprising, because a lot of the people of some of the countries that are coming in as migrants, the people who are actually born here, of those nationalities, they're actually going to be more patriotic than we actually give them credit for. So we have to believe that the divine God is on our side. And I really do feel that there will be disruptions, there will be issues, there will be some crises in more places, some places more than others. But I feel ultimately there will be a major shift. And what I kind of get the feeling is there's a tarot card called the Tower. And if you kind of have a look at that, I should have actually brought it out. I didn't even think I would mention it. And it kind of represents a lot of things that are happening. It's a tower. It's dark skies, thunder and lightning, and things being thrown out of these windows. It's almost like an ancient tower, and things being thrown out of the windows. And I kind of liken that to when you're kind of doing spring cleaning and you just pull things out of the cupboard. I don't know if I've mentioned this before. That's what I feel. There's a cleansing, and a cleansing is going to need to happen. And sometimes a cleansing, depending on how much we find in our cupboards and how much junk and rubbish we want to sort of sort through, will depend on how long it takes for us to clean it up. The more people that give us a hand to actually sort through, the faster we can actually get through something. So if we use that analogy in terms of, if we, the more we come together collectively, have faith in our nationality of Australia first, really, yeah. I'm wondering whether I need to be cautious with saying that as well. But I'm going to say it because I feel people need to hear it. People need to hear it. And we have to believe in our patriotism for this country. A lot of people fought for our freedoms of this country. A lot of people died for the freedoms of this country. And this country, as young as it is, has achieved so much, and we need to be proud of this country. And there are a lot of people who are proud of this country, and it's actually We're starting to see it in the momentum, but we're just in that now. Things that people are becoming aware, people awakening, becoming aware. And so long as collectively we don't forget who we are, we come together to help one another. Brother help brother, neighbor help neighbor. We need to come together collectively to do that. So I do really feel that goodness will prevail. I don't believe that. Anyway, yeah, I feel Australia's going to struggle for a little while other countries are sort of making the shift. I feel we're going to be struggling for a little while. We haven't reached our peak in our struggle, is what I feel. Let me move on to the next question. Hi, Laura. I heard that Australia's pension funds will be used to buy Bitcoin. How do you think that will turn out for Australia? That's from Karen. Hi, Karen. Look, I haven't actually heard of that, to be honest. I don't get a good feeling about it if that is true. I should actually look into that. To be honest, sometimes I scour the questions beforehand. Sometimes I might just have a quick squizzy, or I might just notice one question here or there. But most of the time I'm reading the questions raw. So I'm not familiar with that, to be honest, Karen. My immediate feeling is I don't get a good feeling of it. I don't get a good feeling. Because if we're talking about using pension funds for Bitcoin, we're talking about things going digital sooner. What do I mean by that? I don't feel Australia is ready to actually expand into Bitcoin in many areas, but if that's the case, I might look into it. But in just reading this, I don't actually get a good feeling about it, but it could just be my caution around it. But it's just my immediate reaction that I got as soon as I read the question was I didn't like the idea. I didn't feel comfortable with the idea. I got caution around the idea. I don't know why at this moment, but I hope that that's sort of answered your question. Okay, next question from A. Lion. Will Albo make it through to 2028? Will One Nation come in? Okay, I've said this before. I've actually said it for a while. And this is one area where I really hope that I'm wrong. But I actually feel Albanese will squeeze his nose through the next election. One Nation will have built enough momentum to actually control policy. So the damage that government can actually do is from now up until the election, more so than what they will be able to do afterward, because One Nation will be able to have built up enough momentum to control policy, but there are still a lot of rhinos around that will actually vote with One Nation, Labor policies and against One Nation. And I also feel that the Liberals haven't wised up. They're too busy trying to compete with One Nation than to actually become unified. And they may wake up afterward, but not right now. Okay, this is from Blue Onion. Hello, Blue Onion. Thank you, Laura. I'm not sure if I've asked this question before, but I'm concerned about conscription. Will the Australian government conscript our sons and daughters to a war? No. I feel that would only happen when there's really, I don't feel that our military is as mighty as it used to be. And so they may call for people, but I don't feel conscription will be actually pushed. Unless there's some kind of invasion happening, which did happen back in World War II, I think, when the Japanese invaded in Darwin. I don't feel that that's going to happen. Well, not with the Japanese. And if you're questioning about China, China's not going to do a land invasion. They've already invaded in a different way. They're doing a subtle invasion. They've infiltrated into our political system in a way that basically they have a lot of soft power. They've been very clever in how they've been able to influence and capture a lot of aspects of Australian manufacturing, farmland, and so forth. So I don't believe the government will push for conscription, but I feel there's going to be a call out for people to join. I feel that there's going to be a call out for people to join, but not be forced to. But I feel there's going to be a call out for people to join. Okay, moving on from Tina Rayner. Hi, Laura. It looks like we have 1 to 2 times interest increase. Is this will this be the starting point of real estate collapse? Okay, this is interesting because what I'm actually feeling is what I mentioned earlier. I feel the bubble's going to burst in relation to real estate. And yes, kind of what in terms of interest rate rising, people aren't going to be able to afford because people will be extending their means of affordability. Because usually you've got to, from what I understood of banking many years ago, was when they used to lend money was you couldn't exceed 30 to 35% of your monthly affordability to be able to sustain a mortgage, and you know. And you could borrow up to 95% of the purchase price. And I think they stopped that for a while. I think they're reintroducing that. That's where it's concerning because people come in buying property at a low interest rate. They stretch themselves with affordability. So if they come in and they buy themselves $1 million property and they borrow 95% of that $1 million to actually purchase that property, their income, 30% of their income would have to be able to furnish that mortgage, that very high mortgage. 95% of $1 million pretty much is what, $950,000 mortgage. And so to actually borrow that much, and then as soon as interest rates rise, even 1 or 2 points, people will struggle because they're actually borrowing to their capacity. So where the collapse will come will be people won't be able to sustain mortgages if they've borrowed exceeding their affordability, basically. And because I'm seeing this influx of people pushing property because the government probably trying to make money is, and I actually just heard recently, what's interesting is Albanese has just gone and sold 2 or 3 of his properties, one in Marrickville, 1 or 2 other places, just before some of this came through. So it's almost like an insider trading type of thing, in my opinion, where he was able to sell his properties before anything has actually been introduced. And so, yeah, I do feel that the collapse will be the property boom, everyone wanting to go in, which increases the prices. You know, the more people are interested, the more people can start to demand more value for their property, because you see more people are interested in buying because people buy maybe because there's a rush to buy, scarcity, want that one property that they think is affordable. And so you get an influx of people wanting to do that extending their financial situation. So as soon as those interest rates do rise, which is likely to, yeah. So I do feel it will be the starting point, one of the starting points. But I also too, what's going to happen is then when things start coming down, the smart investors will go in and start buying those properties cheaply. That's what's going to start to happen. So you've got to be careful not to be swept up with the crowd. It's almost the same theme of being prepared in home, so you're not sort of lined and queued up to buy a bag of rice, for example. So you've got to just sort of be prepared, be patient, but be swift in actioning some things so you can actually be patient in certain situations. Hope this answered your question. Okay. Next question. Are we heading for food shortages soon or famine in the... I don't see famine. And I don't see extreme. I don't feel it's going to be extreme food shortages, but I feel like there's going to be intermittent disruptions. I feel the government is not going to want to have people turn against them. So what they're going to do is they're going to allow things to become uncomfortable, and that discomfort will allow them to push policy. And then they'll be able to do enough to make it look like they're being benevolent by introducing tax reductions or, some kind of, allowances or government grants or so forth, which will garner a bit of support. And I feel that that's how they're going to do it. That's how they're going to get themselves over the line. And that's how they're going to incrementally start to actually implement some of these policies that they know they're not going to have a chance. They've got to try to really go for broke now. And so when the backlash happens, they've got to sort of quickly backpedal and reevaluate and make it look a little bit promising, even if they're stealing some of the policies from one nation to make it look like it's theirs, because people buy what they're being sold because they're watching mainstream media who seem to be regurgitating, or maybe perhaps in cahoots. Unfortunately, I don't watch mainstream media so much anymore. I can't sustain watching it anymore because I see the inconsistencies in the reporting, unfortunately. And there are people who are very vulnerable in our society who really trust a lot of what's being said and follow the guidance. So, and that leads into the next question. There won't be a famine. There will be food shortages intermittently. And what will happen is there may be panic buying as well. And that's what you really need to avoid. And so moving into the next question, how likely are household power outages? I actually feel very likely. I feel like there'll be intermittent power outages. Like I said, they don't want to allow so much to happen to the point where people become so angry that they're demanding that they get kicked out of government. They're going to be doing enough that will actually help them introduce something that will look appealing, with benefits that would appear to be beneficial to us as consumers, as the citizens. And that's how they're going to incrementally move themselves forward. So should you prepare for it? Yes, you should. You should prepare in many ways. You should prepare in many ways, but be prepared to be prepared to sort of, you don't want to be stuck in 6 months or 12 months supply. Or my feeling on this is you want to be looking at 2 to 4 weeks in advance of just being able to, if there's a shortage when something comes through, you're going to be able to manage. Because I feel like I'm kind of getting images of the shelves will be empty at times, but then they'll be full, but they can go swiftly as well because people will panic buy. So that's what you kind of need to be mindful of, those things. But yes, do prepare in many ways. And you want to prepare now before people start to panic to want to prepare, and then these things that are available won't become available for you to prepare with. Also, too, I will mention if you're going to be buying things to store water, you want to get things that are food grade standard, BPA free, and so forth, because you know you're storing water. Find out how you should store it accurately. There are some good channels out there that actually do that. But yeah. All right, let's move on. Hi, Laura. Will Australia be going to get more immigrants in the coming years? And will that make the situation worse, or just be doing the same? So this is from Linking Atlas. What I said before, Pauline Hanson actually had raised this. I just saw a brief video on her earlier, that the Albanese government is pushing through 12,500 citizenship applications, I think, from migrants who have just freshly come into the country, and they're going to be basically mostly for the western suburbs area that's predominantly Labor Greens. So if they can get those minority groups as voting blocks, that's really the objective. That's really how they're wanting to get themselves ahead of the game as well, in terms of getting themselves voted in permanently. It may work for the next election, but it won't work for the election after that. So it won't be, it will actually make things worse. I feel like crime will increase. I feel there's going to be a disconnect in terms of really, we're being taught to be tolerant of the migrants coming in, but the migrants aren't really necessarily tolerant of our way of life, and they will feel empowered by that. They will be empowered by that. They'll have protections. These anti-hate speeches and so forth, they'll be protected by that, by anything like that. Okay, next question from Mosh Mosh. Okay, hi Laura, will One Nation win in Victoria 2026? I just got immediately yes. I've said this a few times before. I actually said this recently, and I made a bold prediction that One Nation will be, yeah, I do actually see them being in power and government in Victoria. Will they make a positive impact to help Victorians? Absolutely, they will. I feel like they're going to lead the way. I feel like Victorians have suffered, and there's going to be a change for them. Do they win on a federal level or make positive impact to manufacturing, gas and oil? On a federal level, they won't win on a federal level in terms of winning the top job. What they will do is they will win enough seats to be able to have enough clout to be able to steer and control. And so I feel the polls are showing that One Nation momentum is very strong. And they, in some polls, have actually even overtaken Labor. They've definitely overtaken Liberals, the Nationals. But rather than working together, they're actually working against, trying to sort of, for their own survival. But I see a different party forming completely, and One Nation is going to be very instrumental in actually having that party form as a major opposition party. And it's not quite their time to actually run federal government, but they're going to win enough seats. They're going to be able to influence policy moving forward. And if once they're in government, there will be a very big change, a positive impact in terms of manufacturing for gas and oil. Now, in saying that, what's really interesting is manufacturing, I feel, is going to take off here in Australia, because there's going to be a very high demand, and there's going to be investors that are wanting to invest, but it's just not really going to be benefiting us so much. So we actually have the raw materials. We produce it for foreign nations. They take it and we buy it off them, and then we're at their mercy of actually selling it to us at a price that they want to sell it to us for. Where we are basically a country that can be self-sustaining. We have enough raw materials here to be able to sustain us without really needing anything. But we've got the rare earth minerals, we've got the coal, we've got everything we really need, but we are not doing it for ourselves. So I feel, I actually feel that manufacturing is going to start to increase and take off, but I also feel it's not going to be to our benefit so much. but it will actually bring revenue into the country. But I also feel we're going to be affected by just high prices in terms of utility services, electricity, and so forth. And I do feel that the Albanese government is actually wanting to try to use this opportunity to phase out gas, but I'm getting that they'll be unsuccessful in doing that. But they're really going to try their darndest to sort of push something through. Okay, next question by Jack. Okay, we've got a few questions, 4 questions by Jack. Hi, Laura. Thank you for all the wonderful insight videos. Some questions below. 1, do you still see the government going through with abolishing the CGT discount and negative gearing given the current economic climate? And if so, will it be grandfathered? I think that that's what they're actually trying to do. This is in relation to the, I mentioned it before, I've gone blank because it's late, capital gains tax. So this is in relation to the capital gains tax. And so it looks like that will be going through. And yes, I do feel it will be grandfathered, which would mean that if you actually get to buy a property before a particular time, you'll actually won't fall under this new legislation. And I feel that's where the increase and the influx of, and this is why all these property investors are coming out to get you on webinars and so forth. And so if you can afford to buy, if you can sustain interest rate rises and that, but I would caution you if you can't as well, and be cautious of being swept up into everything. And also to be cautious of buying into a market that's kind of an influx of rising, and you may be paying more, where you could potentially, depends on whether you're an investor to actually buy and sell, and that's, you know, that's what your main objective is. But if you're looking for something more long term, yeah, then it probably wouldn't make a difference. But yes, I do feel that's going to go ahead. Question 2, in the coming World War III, will Australia be safe? Are there some states safer than others? If you're talking about states here in Australia, okay, in terms of government, I feel Victoria is going to make a change in terms of government. Sorry, I don't always look because I feel Victoria is going to be actually making a change and improving policy, but I feel crime in Victoria is going to start rising because there's been a lot of youth crime in Queensland. I see crime's going to be on the rise. I see unrest a little bit more on the rise. People just a bit more aggressive, impatient, argumentative. I'm seeing people punching each other, maybe at traffic lights or something. I'm seeing more exchanges like that happening. So in terms of safe, I'm just getting better the devil you know, if that makes sense. Sometimes it's better to stay where you are because you're familiar and you know how to navigate through than to actually go somewhere new and to have to start somewhere fresh and you're not really familiar with your surroundings. If you are going to make a move, going somewhere rural may be more advantageous. Moving into more high density areas, I feel this is where the actual issues will be in more high denser populations. But and that's why they're actually, if you see that the, you know, the federal government, all the councils are buying up these lands, or these developers are buying up these lands and building up all these high rises and changing the landscape. And so there's certain parts of, you know, certain council areas where they're very high density living, and is the objective, is to try to usher in an era of 15-minute cities. That's going to fail. That's not going to work. But there are some councils who actually got momentum in doing that, particularly here in New South Wales and Victoria, I feel. I'm getting Tasmania is going to be good. In terms of, it's not going to be so high dense living, but I feel policy wise, not so much. Hope that's answered that question. Let's go to the next question. And in terms of World War III, it's a different type of World War III. The World War III that I'd actually predicted before in my previous videos is going to be more during the period of, it really started, it was really starting in some form, 2019, 2020, 2023, it was starting in some form more so. It's building momentum. But because in America, this is the year for midterms, and in 2 years, that will be the year for their federal elections, their objective is to actually change the administration. They want the Trump administration out, and they're going to do everything in their power, even if they're perceived as being sympathizers to having illegal immigrants voting in their elections and funding them. Um, they're going for broke, and I feel that's what's actually happening globally. But there are people, there are countries and councils and so forth that are actually winning, and that's where the momentum is going to be happening. So some towers will be cleaned a little bit more faster and effectively than others. But I feel like the duration that it's going to be happening with specifically is going to be from 26 to 32. And so that can be a bit precarious in some stages, in some countries. Um, do you see, this is still with Jack, the last question, which is basically the first question. I've gone in reverse. Do you still see the government going through with abolishing, oh no, hang on, I've read that already. What is the best form of wealth presentation? Sorry, I'm reading down. What is the best form of wealth preservation in the coming years? Farmland, physical gold and silver, houses, commercial properties like warehouse, medical centres, or shopping centres? Um, Physical gold and silver, mainly because if you go back, not just decades, but really centuries, gold has always been something that long term really can be very sustaining. Um, Gold and silver. Silver's more volatile. Silver, I predicted silver will be rising. I haven't actually checked what the actual interest rate, the actual spot prices are for gold and silver, but I predicted that it's going to rise. But silver's always going to be a little more volatile. But I feel housing is kind of like a hit and miss. I feel like housing, you're always going to be um, appreciating in value. Most of the times, the housing will be appreciating in value. Some will appreciate faster, depending on the location and depending on demand. But I feel housing is going to kind of come to an abrupt stop and recalibration. Um, and so I feel your timing's got to be right there. Commercial properties, I'm getting a caution around commercial properties like warehouses for some reason. I don't know why. Not medical centres. I feel shopping centres could be a little advantageous. Farmland, owning farmland, I don't feel you're ever going to go wrong. I feel the danger with farmland. What I'm getting a feeling right now is, and I've seen things in passing, is the federal government trying to basically roll out their green agenda by putting wind turbines into farmland and encroaching and making it difficult for farmers and that. So it depends on where you're buying and what, if you're looking at council plans for the future in that area, you probably could see plans that they want to develop for the next 5 years, 10 years or so. I don't know if they go that far ahead. But of that, I think physical gold and silver Yes. Commercial properties, I'm getting caution. I'm just getting medical centers actually. I feel there's going to be more illnesses, more cancers. So medical centers will probably be quite financially beneficial, um, because I feel there's going to be cancer on the rise. It's going to be very more mainstream, particularly with more technology being rolled out and affecting, people don't realize. Um, and I actually usually have red light in the evening, and unfortunately, I had to put a bright light on because you couldn't see my camera from the computer is very grainy. But I was tempted to just leave my red light on. Um, so, last question for Jack. Do you see any disruptions to food, water, electricity supply? I think I just answered that before, Jack, with a couple of questions before with Joy 39 and platform. And so a few questions before I've actually just answered that. Okay, let's move on to relaxing observer. Hi, Laura. Do you see the real estate market in the next 3 years collapsing 40 to 50% drop or just straight downward of 10 to 15%? It's a very specific question. Real estate market drop. Okay, I'm kind of getting that in general, it's going to be like a 10 to 15% drop, but there's going to be some areas where they've been overdeveloped and overdeveloped where the infrastructure is not in place for the overdevelopment. That's likely to drop 40 to 50%. And it's likely to be in areas where they've probably built where there's flood zones and things like that because they're just trying to sort of bring in high density living and take advantage of space. And, so I feel in some of those areas, they may actually start to drop significantly. Maybe reselling would be difficult in some of those areas, particularly if some more natural disasters like that start to happen, that can actually make it a little bit more difficult. But I feel in general, it's going to be like a 10 to 15% drop. Okay, this is Ivana. Hi, Laura. Do you see home prices decreasing on the Gold Coast? I just got yes straight away. Um, yes. I just got the coastal prices. The prices on some of the coastal towns may actually drop. There may be a boom and there may be a drop directly afterward. Because I'm sort of seeing a rise and then a drop, and I'm just trying to see timing wise, will the boom come before or after? So I'm getting that if you see a boom, expect a drop. Um, so yes, to answer your question, Ivana. Okay, next question, Naomi. Hi, Laura. The USA is retreating to have its power block in the Southern and Northern America continents. The Middle East will run the data centers for the coming surveillance state. China will control the BRICS zone, with Russia and EU and UK are already beginning to align with China economically. My position is, who will Australia align with? Will we seek to be independent? If so, how will we build a sovereign wealth fund so that our central bank is not controlled by the Bank of International Settlement as it is currently controlled? Thank you in advance. Okay, I'm going to sort of look at this question again. So you're saying the USA is retreating to have its power block in the Southern and Northern American continents. Yes. They're not retreating, though, they're expanding. I don't see them retreating. I feel what they're doing is expanding, and they're actually going to start to garner more support from the European nations. And they're actually coming head to head with some of the with the current UK government. But the Keir Starmer is going to be ousted. The government there is going to change, and America is going to actually come to UK's rescue. So I don't really necessarily agree with that statement. I feel China has aligned, the UK has aligned itself absolutely economically with China, as has Canada, as is Australia. So really, Australia is more in alignment with China. Um, I feel Australia is more in danger of becoming a vassal state to China um, than actually being independent. And so I actually feel America's influence is going to expand. America's military might is going to expand. America's economic influence. People are wanting to actually collaborate and join parties, particularly nations that weren't privileged to do so before with the United States. And what's happening now is they're actually the European Union is going to be at risk of collapsing, most likely partially collapsing, because countries are going to be breaking away, and they're already now starting to break away from their voting blocs because they're starting to be more emboldened. So you will see European Union collapsing their power, collapsing, more of the conservative movement rising. You watch out for Greece. Greece is going to become quite powerful. I keep on getting Greece. Greece is going to be quite powerful. And I feel now what's happening with Belgium, there's actually going to be some kind of shift in Belgium, and the people are standing up against government policies of what's being introduced there, because Belgium seemed to be the epicenter of some of this globalist agenda. So I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't believe BRICS, because Russia has already agreed not to actually move ahead with BRICS and to start dealing with US currency again. So I actually feel America's influence is expanding. The China influence is diminishing. Russia's influence is, Russia is actually going to form some kind of economic agreement with, there's going to be some kind of collaboration with the Trump administration. I actually see the Ukraine war coming to an end soon. Well, not so soon. I feel it actually might go for another 1 to 2 years, but it's kind of going to be more like a drawn out war. And I know that Zelensky's actually gained a little bit of popularity because he's got experience with some of the drone technology that he's been able to use to actually fight against some of the drone technology from Russia coming in that Iran is using, particularly around the Strait of Hormuz and so forth, and to sort of attack ships and so forth. So I digress. So I actually feel Australia is, this current administration is more aligned with China. We're not independent from anyone. And I actually see the Five Eyes that used to be the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and I think the US. I feel it's almost going to be rejigged in a way that's going to really be spearheaded by China in the Australasian region. So we're really at risk of becoming a vassal state, not independent from anyone, really. So in terms of international banking settlement as a current, I feel that if this current administration has its way, they introduce cashless society, digital ID, social credit system, where you get penalised if you're not compliant. That's what they're looking at actually introducing here in Australia. And the more that they can actually keep liberals turning against one nation, if once liberals smart enough, liberals are about self-preservation, not necessarily for the people, but for themselves. And that's why Labor's going to win another term, and Labor's able to influence the so-called Australian version of rhinos to actually vote with them as well. So I don't know if that's answered your question, but thank you for asking. Okay, next question, Andrea. Hi, Laura. I'm new on your channel, only found you yesterday. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too, Andrea. My question is regarding non-human beings, aliens, okay? They say this year that there will be disclosure of aliens. Some say it will happen during the World Cup 2026. Others say it will be a hologram and isn't real. Others say it will be real and want people to think it's a hologram. Okay, what do I feel? Well, I definitely feel aliens are real. They're not holograms. I feel there's going to be disclosure coming from the current administration from the United States, is what I feel is going to happen. I don't know if it's going to happen around the World Cup, but I feel like there's already begun, some disclosures already begun to happen, and I feel more is going to happen. I feel more people are going to start to come forward with talking about their experiences. It's going to actually become more normal to actually talk about it, not so unusual to talk about it. And I feel some things will be exposed about maybe, what is that place called? Something 51, that military base where apparently there'd been some experiments on alien experiments. And I feel some of that, Area 51, I think it's called, I feel that's going to be exposed as well. Exposed, disclosed, combination. If people are wanting people to think that it's a hologram as they're wanting to do something deceptive, it would be because they're wanting to create some kind of distraction because they're wanting to do something else. So if there's talk of it being a hologram, it's not real, it would be to cause a bit of controversy, it would be to cause a bit of a distraction while they're trying to push for something else that is happening. And it's more of a disruption than anything else. Hope this answered your question, Andrea, and thank you for being a new subscriber. Welcome. Olivia, what rules or restrictions will be placed to deal with the fuel issue and how long will they last? I feel we're looking at a period of 6 months or more. I feel that this is going to sort of, I feel fuel-wise, it's going to affect us over a period of 2 years, to be honest, Olivia. Even if potentially, why am I feeling that? Because I got 2 years. So even if what's happened in Iran is resolved, Australia's on a different agenda. Australia's under a different agenda, under a different influence. And as I mentioned, the UK, Canada and Australia, and not so much New Zealand anymore. I keep on saying New Zealand's a little bit out of it. I feel Australia is going to have more issues when it comes to power. Where's the question? Fuel and the type of fuel it's using and how it affects us here. And so the rules and restrictions of you're talking about the current fuel. I'm also talking about other fuel sources as well. I feel they may potentially try to push restrictions on gas because they're trying to use renewables like electric, wind turbine and solar panels and those kind of things. But they need electricity to do that anyway. So the restrictions will be in relation to consumption, how much we could actually use when there is an issue with supply. At the moment, they're saying don't restrict how much fuel we're buying, because they anticipate something coming in. And I feel like there will be something that will come in, but I also feel it will be a hit and miss. Something will come in, it will feel fine. There'll be a rush and they'll say not to panic, and then there'll be another dip. So I feel it will get us used to the disruptions and the inconsistencies, and they will almost simultaneously be trying to push through this agenda of replacing current the current fuel resources that we're using, current fuel sources that we're using. So I feel the restrictions will be intermittent, according to what their agenda is, if that makes sense. Okay, next question. Hi Laura, thanks for doing this. What do you see for Australia as we move into 2030s? Will we have a free and prosperous nation in the next decade? And also, do you see Australia repairing the damage to our national ecosystems? Our national ecosystems, like the Great Barrier Reef, perhaps. I'm kind of, I know that there's been reporting of bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef, with warming waters and so forth. But I feel like it's not what it appears to be. It's not, I feel like there's been mistruths around that as well. But I don't know for sure, but it's just my feeling. So what I'm seeing is leading up to 2030 is where we're going to sort of see a lot of disruptions. As we move into 2030, I'm seeing from 2030 onwards, particularly from 2032 onwards, after the following election, after there'll be 2028 and then 2032, I feel that Australia is going to make a shift. And there's going to be damage to be repaired in a lot of areas. Nature has a way of taking care of itself. And if society came to a stop, you'd find nature would actually take its course and actually take over all of the infrastructure. So nature has a way of actually taking care of itself and actually adapting. It's quite intelligent. So I'm more concerned what man can do to each other and to ourselves and the planet, because I believe that the ecosystems can actually sustain and survive much greater than we can actually as human beings. I feel we're much more destructive and much more foolish with our destruction, that it could be more permanent. But I feel the ecosystems themselves, there will be some ecosystems that I do believe will be wiped out, especially like when there were those wildfires and so forth. There'll be species, but there'll be always an evolution of something that will continue on. So there will be some things that can be repaired, but I don't think there's going to be anything major like that fire that happened. And we hope not, hope to God not. I think a lot of the species were wiped out in that big fire. So I see there will be things that will be reintroduced, that will be able to rebuild both in nature and in our country as well, economically and in many different ways. But it won't be before 2030. It will be sold to us that it is for that, but it actually is going to cause more damage. Okay, next question. Hopefully I'm coming to the end. What is this one, sorry? Autonomous Australian history. That was from Saving the Hills, that question. This is from Autonomous Australian history. In the long term, say 2040, will it be sovereign country, or will China or something control or own it? And what about the role of AI long term, and how will this impact society and our politics? So I'll tell you what I feel here. I feel China has a very strong influence but I feel America's expanding its influence. And I feel not only will America come to UK's, come in to almost save the UK, I feel America, the US is going to actually have influence over Australia when the time's right. And I feel that there's going to be a shift. I'm getting that the US is going to have great influence over Australia in the coming years by 2040. Because what I'm seeing with America is, with the United States, is um, that the Republicans will win the midterms, that Republicans are going to win 2028, that there's going to be a change in the party. I feel Republicans are going to kind of be phased out. The Democrats are going to be morphed into something totally different, that they're going to lose power for at least 10, 12 plus years, which will take us closer to the time period that of what you're actually looking at. And I feel with a Republican form of leadership is actually going to look at alliances very different globally. And America is going to be expanding its influence, almost replicating the expansion of the Commonwealth. It's going to be the US expansion. And they're not, and Australia being the only Western nation in the Southern Hemisphere, the great Western nation. Yeah, it's going to be a key area for America to want to actually take a real interest in. And they're going to start to take an interest in already when it comes to mining and the agreements that they've made for rare earth minerals, because AI taking over. So I see that by that time, America would probably own Australia more than China would. And that's what I'm predicting and what I'm sensing. But to continue on with the rest of the question, what about the role of AI long term and how will this impact society? What I'm seeing with AI is really interesting. I was saying to my husband just a couple of days ago that AI is not going to be able to affect, like, for example, things that are manual labor type of work where you're actually needing to work with your hands, even plumbing. There may be things that you can use to sort of improve tools and equipment, but things that require, like, for example, a blacksmith, or, you can't see a robot coming in and changing a shoe on a horse. So those kind of things that require craftsmanship and skill. Um, I feel, carpentry, plumbing, electrician, even though you can use technology there, I feel the skill of hands is going to be very, very important. And I also feel craftsmanship is going to almost revert back to old times where, you can use AI and mechanics to actually design, but and use machines to build. But there's going to be something about craftsmanship in the way that's going to be needed moving forward, and it's going to be an in-demand type of job. Um, and so I feel where it's going to be affected is probably more the areas of IT, um, maybe areas in law and so forth. They're probably more white collar type of work rather than blue collar and manual type of work. So I hope that's answered your question. And yeah, it will impact society because it will actually, I feel like it's going to reconnect us with some of our past values, and in a good way. And the politics are going to be affected when there's a change in government as well. I feel it's going to be enhanced. That kind of support for that type of industry will be enhanced. Manufacturing is really going to start to make a comeback, and countries are going to start to bring it back within their own nations. So the work and manufacturing work, and even though they can introduce AI and robots and so forth into that, they're still going to need humans to do certain particular jobs. So it's not going to be taken over. We're not going to be run by machines. I feel like it's going to be positive, but it's going to be a shift of where it was going in terms of going and getting a university degree and focusing on certain type of subjects, IT, and I feel that's where there's going to be major shifts. But then the other shifts are going to be more advantageous to a different industry. Okay, Deborah, what will Australia look like in 2030 onwards compared to today? I think, Deborah, I've actually covered that in some of the other questions. But 2030 onwards, I really see it positive. And as I just explained with the last question, I hope that that's been able to answer your question as well. If you want to know something specific, please feel free to ask something more specific, so I can go deeper for you. Thank you for your question. Okay, Deborah, again, will the Australian housing buying and renting market become more affordable in the future? In the future, yes, not in the immediate future. In the future, yes. In the immediate future, yes, and then there's going to be a period, and then there's then again in the future. But I feel the demand's going to drive the prices up. The demand's going to make people actually probably stretch themselves, and that's where it's going to sort of start to affect a lot of people. The crash will be more in terms of people can't afford to sustain, and the properties, people buy what demand states rather than the true value, and I feel there'll be a correction in that. And I feel once the correction happens, then there's going to be a different period of people moving forward and buying again. Will Australia become a republic? I just got yes. I just got yes. It won't be before 2032. Most likely something around 2035 onwards. Maybe 2040, 2035, 2040. There could be probably another referendum, maybe take it down that path. But I see potentially yes. I don't see I see the Commonwealth losing its power. I see the Commonwealth is going head to head more aligned with China and influenced by China economically and in all ways, and going head to head with the current administration in the United States. And I feel they're going to lose. But when the party changes, America's going to come in. And so it would be more, yeah, I can see we can become more of a republic further down the track. Thanks. Blessings from Australia. Blessings to Zippy. Thank you. And this is the last question. Yay! It's only because it's getting late. Oh my God, my short videos are really long. I have no concept of time. Hi, Laura. I just found your wonderful channel recently. Thank you, Faye. Or is it Faye? I have a couple of questions. Okay. For the rest of the year, do you see fires in Victoria or any tsunamis coming in the country? It's a good question. So when you said tsunamis, I just heard alarms and I saw something, but I saw it fizzling. So I'm getting something on the West Coast, but I feel like it's not really going to have much impact, not necessarily a tsunami, but fires, yes. So I feel like a tsunami could be brought on by an earthquake more from the Indian Ocean side coming over. But I actually see moving rising waters and disruptive waters coming along the east coast down south more. I'm seeing like movement, rough waters happening there, but no tsunami per se. I feel we're kind of protected. I feel it will lose momentum by the time it actually reaches our land. But I see in Victoria, not in Victoria. I'm seeing south, but more on the east coast, more rather than Victoria, more maybe New South Wales. But in terms of fire, I'm actually getting that there's a potential for a fire. And I'm getting something around Bendigo. It could be related to a previous fire of Bendigo. I feel that there's a potential of something like that coming up. I don't know whether they're backburning or they're neglecting to backburn. But I'm being shown Bendigo, and I feel it may be, if it's not Bendigo as such, it's going to be more in relation to something previously that happened in Bendigo. So I think it could be a little devastating. But I see that that will be coming up, and I feel it will be more in the drier months, cooler, drier months. But I also feel as something sparks it. It's not weather related, it's more human related, and I feel it's more something to do with overheating and some sparks happening. Yeah, I hope I'm wrong. All right, thank you everyone for watching. I really appreciate that. Really, I get a lot of positive feedback, and I really appreciate that a lot of people are watching my videos, and I'm very humbled about it, to be honest. I'm really sincere when I say that. I'm learning a lot about how to do things online. I know that I'm not the most structured, but I really do appreciate people taking an interest in my channel and watching my videos and the wonderful feedback and the positive feedback. And I also appreciate the people giving me constructive feedback as well, because you also have a voice and a place here, and I do take things on board. But in saying that, I'm human, and I'm not always. I try to strive for accuracy more than being right. But I'm not always accurate. But I do strive for it. But I always try to come from a good place, and I always say a prayer before I actually say a prayer to God, and I pray for God to give me his wisdom and allow me to be the conduit to actually share the visions that he feels are necessary to share. And so I'm thankful to God for doing that as well. And thank you for the people who actually give me the positive remarks. And there is somebody that I would also like to give a shout out to. And so I'm going to and I want to give a special shout out to Tom Nero. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your positive feedback, and welcome as well. Good night, everyone, and God bless. Until I'll be coming back probably towards the end of the week to do the Q&A for the personal readings. Okay, good night and God bless.